Now, I'm taking the time out tonight to talk about the low testosterone issue because this affects at least half the male population, especially men over the age of 35. You really see this start to be very prevalent. And it's very underdiagnosed, especially here in the States, because, well, healthcare here generally is very expensive, excessively expensive, right? To the point of being cost prohibitive. So maybe you go for a physical once a year, if that, right? And the system is also very skewed to the point where my brothers, those of us who are the brown, heavily melanated folks, we're a little weary of our medical system, so we don't see doctors as much as we probably should to at least get an official diagnosis, just to make sure that our numbers are in range and everything is good. So now, low testosterone, it doesn't just contribute or even cause erectile dysfunction, but it also greatly reduces your ability to build muscle, to burn body fat, to sleep well, to have mental focus. It even affects your personality, your drive. This can significantly impede your motivation, your actual ambition, self-esteem. You just don't feel the way you feel you should feel. And if you've experienced this, you know what I'm talking about. You don't really quite feel at your best. Right? You want to sleep a bit more than usual. You don't really have the drive to maybe take risks or to get up in life's face, right? You just don't have that dog. Now, low testosterone, essentially the biggest contributor to this is stress. Lifestyle stress, metabolic stress, different types of stress. It can be stress from family, kids, marriage, work, bills, whatever the case is. But a lot of it is chemical, right? And so one of the biggest ways that we can actually improve on this situation, well, there's a few, but the primary one is your diet and what you eat. So your diet is like the substrate that you build everything on top of. So I focus a lot on nutrition, not because it's the only thing that I know anything about, but because that is the ground floor level that everything is built on top of. Now, I put links to scientific studies, if you're interested in reading that type of thing, that really clearly demonstrate the dietary effects of high carbohydrate intake versus low carbohydrate intake and how that affects your testosterone. So there were studies done of groups of men, and they compared high carbohydrate diets and low carbohydrate diets, right? And essentially, it's pretty clear that a high carbohydrate diet yields the best results as far as testosterone. If you wanted to naturally boost and maintain healthy levels of testosterone, having a carbohydrate dominant diet would do that. Now, the question is why, right? And I did a little bit of digging and see if anybody gave a clearer explanation of this as to why. Maybe some people did, I just didn't see it, right? People would talk about the scientific data, but we need to know why. We got to talk about why, right? And so that's essentially what I want to do in this video, to create some clarity, because it's not just about carbohydrates. It's a bit deeper than that. So for example, if you're getting your carbohydrates from, you know, refined grains making cheap pasta or something like that, it's not really going to have the same dietary effects as if you were getting your carbohydrates from, you know, sweet potato, any kind of yams, you know, legumes, whole grains, an abundance of fruit, things like that. It's going to have very different effects because the micronutrients is fundamentally different. And the fiber content is fundamentally different. I mean, even the water content as well is fundamentally different. And all of that matters, right? So getting back to stress, carbohydrates is one of the primary dietary mechanisms to actually drive down stress. Think about like stress eating. The more stressed you are, this would feed into food cravings. And the primary food cravings, actually the only food cravings really, is sweet, salty, crunchy. Those are the three. So if you look at foods that you typically have a craving for, it's not fat, it's not chicken, it's not any of that. It's sweet, salty, crunchy. So for example, let's say potato chips or any kind of chips. Chips typically are at least salty and crunchy, right? And then there's some chips that are sweet, salty, and crunchy, right? But at least salty and crunchy. Salty and crunchy are very good for managing anxiety. Right? Now, if you're in a low vibrational depressive state, you'll probably lean more towards sweet foods. Maybe you'll have a sugar craving, right? Sugar is very good if you're in a low energy state. And perpetually being in a low energy state will crush your testosterone, right? And the reason for that is because testosterone is fairly energy intensive. So you need to have a certain level of energy in order to maintain adequate levels of testosterone. Right? As men, we don't have the estrogen and progesterone, things like that, that we can leverage against stress. This is one of the reasons also why men tend to live shorter lives than women. Right? Estrogen is like a good buffer against stress. So as men, we really have to exercise more self-care if we're going to live a long-term longevity life, a good quality life, right? Living to the fullness. So it's very important that we keep our energy up and keep ourselves in a high energy state. So in terms of sweet, salty, crunchy. Now, sweet would be all your fruits. Crunchy would be maybe like apples, right, or certain types of fruits like that. Crunchy could be nuts, eating roasted pistachios, cashews, pumpkin seed kernels, sunflower seed kernels, things like that, especially if they're salted. Now, you don't got to go crazy with the salt, just a little bit of salt sprinkled on there, right? And that goes a long way. Sweet potato, or I just posted a recipe on my Instagram of a red lentil soup and putting a little bit of salt in that with all kinds of other seasonings, and something like that where it's got onion and garlic and lentils and sea salt and pepper and all these kinds of things, and your leafy greens, your crunchy leafy greens, like let's say some broccoli, right, or some cauliflower, or a mix of both, right? Those things all, they significantly improve your brain chemistry and drive down stress. So it's not just the carbs, but also the seasonings. So when you have meals like that and you're eating a variety of fruits and things like that, it just so happens that all of these foods together come with a lot of carbohydrates. Now, in terms of like a specific amount of carbohydrates that, generally speaking, any man dealing with this issue should eat, it should be at least 300 grams of carbs a day. Right? At least 300. And I say that because in writing diet plans, there is a certain number that you hit that just tends to produce better results. So 300 grams of carbohydrates has a total caloric value of 1,200 calories. So when you avoid eating below that 1,200 calories, this also keeps you out of a very steep caloric deficit. A steep caloric deficit is one of the things that will actually crush your testosterone, right? Because you have a lack of energy, and low energy state will drive food cravings and crush testosterone. Evidently, this will also raise a stress hormone called cortisol, right? So we're still talking about stress here. So The reason why I started with the food cravings and explaining which food cravings are what they are, right? The sweet, salty, crunchy, is because all of those things should be satiated in your diet. And it's better to satiate your food cravings rather than constantly restrain yourself from indulging in your food cravings, because that deprivation of resources serves as a stressor. Also, incidentally, constantly veering away and avoiding sugar and avoiding salt and avoiding anything crunchy, for example, this can lead you to be in a very steep caloric deficit. So a lot of guys will eat really big salads that are very low calorie. So sure, a salad could be pretty filling, but it's not very energy dense. And having that low energy state will crush your testosterone. Interestingly enough, even something like salt, right? Salt lowers cortisol. Now, we're going to talk about cortisol because this relates to a high carb versus high fat diet. So you'll have like a keto or a carnivore diet or something where it's like we avoid carbohydrates as much as possible. And this shows to reduce testosterone, right? And the reason why this is the case is because, number one, it's more likely that you'll put yourself in a caloric deficit, but also you don't have the available energy to use. Right, so let's say you have a slow metabolism and your body favors that quick available glucose. Well, if you just have a fat and protein diet, your body has to work harder to get the necessary glucose to be able to feed your brain. Your brain uses 20% of all the dietary glucose you consume. Right? 20% at least. And so your brain is constantly craving sugar, scientifically known as glucose. So when you have a diet with easily accessible glucose, like from carbohydrates, that will skyrocket brain function. And so when you adequately feed your brain the sugar or glucose that it needs, this then ramps up hormone production. So think about like your hierarchy of needs. You have a hierarchy of needs. So let's say at the bottom you have like you're just surviving, and then at the top you're thriving. Just surviving crushes testosterone, and thriving elevates it. Now you can cut all of your carbohydrates and survive, but you won't necessarily be thriving. So your blood sugar level will always be kind of low and that kind of thing. And then your body has to go through all of this work in order to deal with the fact that, yeah, you're not really getting any carbohydrates in your diet, right? You can survive by cutting all of your carbs. You can, but it comes at a cost. It's not free, right? But if you want to thrive, well, putting those fruits and sweet potato and quinoa and basmati rice and legumes and all of that type of stuff in your diet is your best bet. So as far as cortisol levels would get really racked up with all of your environmental stressors, your lifestyle stressors, poor sleep quality, going to bed way too late, waking up way too early. This will keep your cortisol levels chronically elevated, right? Now, in addition to that, chronically elevated cortisol will also cause vascular constriction. This will raise your blood pressure. And so now we get into the stressor of vascular constriction and high blood pressure, which is also a stressor. And high blood pressure, now this is where you're starting to get to poor blood flow. And the reason why high blood pressure and vascular constriction is relevant is because this also leads into a lack of oxygenation of your cells. Lack of oxygen flowing through your blood and getting to all of your cells, especially your brain. So as a result, this can put you in a state of heightened anxiety. This can destroy your sleep quality. This can inhibit your training performance in the gym. This can reduce your cognitive function. You don't learn as quickly. You stumble on your words. You forget things, all of this type of stuff, right? So you just see this cognitive diminishment. This can also eat into your level of motivation, right? This can cause dopamine resistance, right? Which is your reward hormone, right? It's very important to keep you motivated, that you feel like doing things, right? So that vascular constriction, that high blood pressure, that's a key indicator that something's a problem, right? This got to be addressed ASAP. Carbohydrates is one of the primary mechanisms actually for keeping your body hydrated. And there's a zero-sum game between carbohydrates and fat, right? So when you raise carbohydrates, you reduce fats. When you reduce carbohydrates, in order to make up the difference, you raise your fats, right? Now, fats are like a diuretic. So like, for example, if you were to cut all of your carbohydrates and just have a fatty diet, you would actually lose a lot of weight really quickly, except it won't be body fat, it'll just be water. So you're using the dietary fat to dehydrate your body. Now that dehydration will skyrocket your cortisol levels, it'll cause vascular constriction, raise your blood pressure, destroy your energy levels, your sleep quality, etc., right? And then your body has to kind of finagle things in order to adapt to that low energy state and that vascular constriction and loosen that up. And this is where kidney function really needs to get ramped up. Your body has to make ketones, all this kind of stuff to readjust, right? And going through that whole process in and of itself is a stressor, right? If you're going to go through that low energy state, you might as well fast in order to get there rather than just eat a bunch of fatty foods, right? One way is just a much quicker way to get there. But in terms of testosterone, right, we got to be well fed. Hydration is extremely important because the more hydrated you get, this will bring your blood pressure down, and this will start to eat into those cortisol levels and bring that down. As cortisol declines, testosterone increases. There's an inverse relationship between cortisol and testosterone. So as cortisol comes down, testosterone comes up, right? And vice versa is also true, right? So there's this codependent relationship, or antagonist relationship, I should say. So when you have a diet, for example, that is very fruit dominant, it's not just carbohydrate dominant, but fruit dominant. You're eating a lot of watermelon, cantaloupe, mangoes. You're eating a lot of grapes, apples, pears, kiwis, citrus fruits like oranges, tangerines, grapefruit, things like this, right? Your tangelos and whatnot. You're eating pomegranate, right? There's all kinds of fruits I can name. And then let's say in addition to that, you're juicing beets, right? You're juicing cucumber. Let's say you're doing cucumber, beet, carrot, and apple juice, right? So you're juicing a beet with the beet greens, a carrot, large cucumber, and like a Granny Smith apple, right? And you're juicing that and drinking that first thing in the morning. Even just juicing something like that first thing in the morning when you wake up will drive down your cortisol levels. This will start tapping into raising your blood pressure and your testosterone pretty much immediately. This has very quick effects. And you're not just hydrating your body at that point, which is really important because in order for your cells to receive oxygen and nutrients, in order for oxygen to be carried through your blood into all of your cells, you have to be hydrated in order for that to happen. Now, it's not just the water content in the food that makes the difference. The water in the food is important. But along with that is the electrolytes, right? So there's an abundance of very important nutrients that are found in these carbohydrate-rich foods, right? You got your potassium, you got your manganese, your magnesium, your calcium, your iron, right? Folate, variety of different B vitamins, vitamin C. And all of these things work together in order to, number one, alkalize your body, in order to relieve the stress off of your kidneys, and relieving the stress off of your kidneys also helps with vasodilation and bringing down your blood pressure and the cortisol levels, right? You see, we keep going back to blood pressure and cortisol. Before I continue here, I just wanted to let you know that you can actually book a call with me, a one-on-one call with me, by hitting the link in the description box below. Just pick your day and time, and we'll meet up then on a video chat. Right? And so everything that I mentioned tonight is going to keep going back to blood pressure and going back to cortisol, because the root of low testosterone is blood flow and hydration levels, right? So just talking about different foods to leverage here, right? So those electrolytes, because the electrolytes are needed in order to funnel the water and the nutrients to your cells. Just drinking water is not enough. You could drink a bunch of empty water and you'll just make it worse by just increasing the amount of urinating you're doing. And then the more you urinate, the more electrolytes you lose in the process. You lose more potassium, you lose more vitamin C, you lose more magnesium and all of these water-soluble nutrients the more urinating you do. So, you know, when people say, hey, you know, it's a really good idea is drinking a gallon of water a day, maybe, maybe not. It really depends on what your diet looks like, right? I'm not a fan of just drinking a gallon of just empty water. That's not really a magic bullet. It actually may make it worse. Now, people may say to me, with all the carbohydrates, I'm trying to lose weight. Isn't that going to make it harder for me to lose weight? And the answer is no, right? So people will often cut their carbohydrate intake because they say, well, I'm insulin resistant, and when I eat carbohydrates, I get gassy, bloated, or, you know, I just struggle to lose weight, this and that. And, you know, people told me that, like, you know, I cut my carbohydrates, and that'll help me to lose weight because it'll bring my blood sugar down. Going back to the cortisol thing again, that will ramp up your cortisol levels because stress will actually ramp up your blood sugar. Right? This is why, like, diabetics often, like type 2 diabetics, will wake up, you know, first thing in the morning and wake up with a blood sugar of like 180 without even eating anything. They say, how's my blood sugar damn near 200 and I'm just waking up first thing in the morning? I ain't even eat anything yet. Right? So it's not just about cutting your carbohydrates. Nobody ever really improves insulin sensitivity or reverses diabetes by just not eating carbs. It's not really how that works. The primary contributors to insulin resistance is predominantly saturated fat and excess protein, right? All the scientific data that we currently have available shows that the more carbohydrates you consume and the less saturated dietary fat you consume, you reverse your insulin resistance by doing that, right? So when I put people on a diet plan where it's like, you know, 65% of your macros or 60% of your macros is carbohydrates, that often gets the best results. Not just because of the carbs itself, but also because improving blood flow, which is a big part of improving insulin sensitivity, right? Improving hydration levels, electrolyte levels, which also improves mitochondrial function. And your mitochondria, essentially, is the energy producing units of your cells. So you have these little mitochondria around your cells, and they are responsible for the metabolic process and converting glucose into usable energy inside the cell. And so having a carbohydrate dominant diet would greatly improve mitochondrial function, right? Increasing your body's hydration levels increases mitochondrial function, right? Having a diet that improves vasodilation and blood oxygenation also improves the mitochondrial function, right? So all of the foods that I'm talking about and that I've named so far improve mitochondrial function. And with improved mitochondrial function comes more efficient energy production, right? And more efficient glucose conversion into energy, which means the carbs you're eating that's breaking down into glucose, and your cells are using that glucose much more effectively, which means they're not going to just get parked in fat cells and you're going to be tired all day long. Right? So all of this leads back to that. This, once again, is blood flow. And it's not just about the carbohydrates, it's the micronutrients that are typically found inside carbohydrate-rich foods. If you had a diet and you just simply added more magnesium-rich foods to your diet, that in and of itself would contribute to higher levels of testosterone. So often what I would do with people is I would have them supplement with magnesium, right? So you would supplement with anywhere from 210 to 420 milligrams of magnesium per day, right? You really don't need to supplement with necessarily a 420. 210 is more than enough, right? And the reason why you supplement with it is because the absorption rate is higher when you do that. So it's like a shortcut. But let's say you add a cup of rolled oats to your diet every day. That's an abundance of magnesium right there. Let's say you add a cup of lentils to your diet, right? So you measure out a cup of lentils dry and you cook that. You have like a lentil soup or something like that. That's like at least 50% of your magnesium for the day right there in the lentils. Then let's say you add leafy greens, whether it be kale, spinach, or broccoli or something like that, and you add like 4 to 6 cups of that to your diet on a daily basis. Then you increase your magnesium with that, right? All those foods that I just mentioned, just those foods alone, okay, contain well over 100%, at least 150% of your magnesium needs for the day. In just those foods. I haven't even named everything, right? If you add pumpkin seed kernels or you add like an ounce of almonds, that would increase it even more, right? Adding more zinc to your diet. Now, all the foods that I just mentioned also come with an abundance of zinc. So the cup of rolled oats measured dry, the cup of red lentils measured dry, those things combined right there make up your total zinc needs for the entire day. As a man, you typically need anywhere from 10 to 12 milligrams of zinc per day. That puts you well over the mark there. If you add chia seeds, like let's say you add 2 tablespoons of chia seeds and you add an ounce of almonds, you can get up to 30 milligrams of zinc per day. Right, just going off the top of my head as far as the mineral contents of any given food. Zinc is one of those minerals that boosts your testosterone, like immediately, right? Very short term and even long term effects, just increasing the amount of dietary zinc and dietary magnesium. Those two things work together, not just to improve your testosterone, but also your blood flow, your immune system, your sleep quality, your brain chemistry, your mental health, everything. Magnesium and zinc combined. Copper. This is also very important for hormone production, nervous system signaling, brain chemistry, sleep quality, muscular contraction, muscle growth, red blood cell production, and all this type of stuff. Copper is super essential to improving blood flow, nervous system function, all that kind of stuff. So let's say now in your diet every day habitually you eat 2 pounds of grapes. 2 pounds of grapes is like around 400 calories or so. It's like 120 grams of carbs or something like that around there. Just kind of ballpark numbers. It's well over 100, right? That right there will give you like what? Anywhere from 120 to 140% of your copper, right? Somewhere around there for the day. So you'll be getting an abundance of zinc from the foods that I just mentioned, and you'll be getting an abundance of copper also from those grapes as well as the lentils, right? And that also yields significant benefits to testosterone. Now, everything I'm just talking about in these foods is all carbohydrate-rich foods, and all of the things that I just mentioned also help to improve insulin sensitivity. Zinc helps to improve insulin sensitivity. Magnesium helps to improve insulin sensitivity, right? Which improves weight loss. I'm going to get into the whole weight loss thing in a second. And then copper leads to healthy red blood cell production and maintenance, and blood oxygenation and nervous system functioning, and directly improves mitochondrial function. So you get a more efficient metabolism, which means your body is more equipped to be able to use glucose, right, and from those carbohydrates as energy, so it's not just getting parked inside fat cells. So glucose uptake into, let's say, skeletal muscle tissue, which is where most of your glucose goes, plus in your brain, you're going to be sharper. So you're going to be able to think more clearly. You're going to be able to learn clearly, right? You're going to be able to get more aggressive about life. This will improve dopamine sensitivity, insulin sensitivity, weight loss, all this type of stuff, right? Hydration levels, everything across the board from the foods that I just mentioned. Sweet potato, grapefruit, right? Foods that are very rich in beta carotene. Beta carotene gets converted into vitamin A inside the body. Vitamin A is essential to testosterone production, right? So you got your sweet potato, you got your grapefruit, cantaloupe, mangoes. These things have an abundance of that beta carotene. Not only is it just good for your skin tone or your skin quality in general, also your liver health and your vascular system, right? Because that beta carotene, that vitamin A, it maintains the tissue of your organs. And this is very important too, because when we get into blood flow, not only do we want vasodilation, but we also want to make sure we protect ourselves from artery calcification, hardening of your arteries, right? Hardening of the tissues inside your heart or your organs in general, right? We don't want calcification going on from excess levels of calcium in the blood that ends up contributing to, you know, the calcification of the tissues, to organ tissues and whatnot. So this protects us from atherosclerosis, which is basically this atherosclerotic plaque buildup inside arteries. So it also protects us from that, and that helps to maintain and improve optimal blood flow. And that's extremely important for something like erectile dysfunction, because erectile dysfunction is the canary in the coal mine when it comes to blood flow, right? Cardiovascular health, right? So far I mentioned beets, cucumber, carrots, apples, and we talk a little bit more about apples, because apples are also really important for testosterone levels also, because apples are a good source of boron, right? And boron helps to improve testosterone as well. All right, then apples are also a rich source of malic acid, and malic acid helps to detoxify your body, maintain and improve optimal levels of digestion, stomach acid, liver protection, all types of stuff, right? So those apples are really important for that. And then apples also have this apple pectin, which is this insoluble fiber that ferments in your colon, and your gut bacteria then use that to produce short chain fatty acids, which ramp up fat metabolism, right? So when people talk about like apple cider vinegar and the weight loss benefits of it, well, if you eat apples, it pretty much ends up having the same effect. The only difference is you're not swallowing a strong fermented substance from apples, but you're just having that apple cider vinegar created in the fermentation process in your gut, right? So your teeth and your gums will thank you for that, because constantly swallowing that apple cider vinegar, you can erode your tooth enamel with that, right? So if you don't want to risk eroding tooth enamel, you may want to consider just eating more apples in your diet. Cranberries, same thing. Cherries, same thing, right? These have very similar benefits to the apples. Strawberries, blueberries, goji berries, and all the foods I'm mentioning so far is all carbohydrates. I think the only foods that I've mentioned so far that aren't carbohydrate dominant are the chia seeds and the almonds, right? And I'm not saying to cut all of your fats out of your diet, because you do need your fats, right? But you don't need a whole lot of fat. Your average man needs anywhere from 35 to 60 grams of fat per day. The official measurement that I go by is a half a gram of fat per kilogram of lean mass, up to 1 gram of fat per kilogram of lean mass. All right, so that's the threshold that I typically go by when I write a diet plan. So covered blood flow, covered insulin resistance or insulin sensitivity, and the reason why that's important is because now going into weight loss, all of the foods I just mentioned help to improve your body's ability to manage your body fat. One of the biggest drivers also to low testosterone is excess estrogen production as a result of having body fat that's too high. Body fat secretes and produces estrogen, right? Because body fat is like an organ, and one of the things your organ of body fat does is produce estrogen. And so this is where we see things like man boobs, or moobs, right, for short. It's because that breast tissue is just a result of just the compounding effects of body fat gain. And this can lead to gynecomastia, all of these type of things as a result of having the insulin resistance and, you know, the dopamine resistance and the excess cortisol levels and all of that type of stuff, right? And your body will find a way to regulate cortisol if you're not doing it in another way. And one of the ways that your body does that is store fat, and then fat produces higher levels of estrogen, and estrogen serves as a way to regulate cortisol. So estrogen, right? So if estrogen is increased, that brings down cortisol, right? And this is typically also why women have an easier time regulating their cortisol, because basically that estrogen just really starts to tick up when the cortisol is just chronically elevated, where men don't really have that, so it just spirals out of control. So when it comes to weight loss, you can't calorie cut your way out, and you can't just carb cut your way out. And the reason why is because, let's say you cut all of your carbohydrates out. Okay, so you just ramp up fat metabolism, but you just end up ramping up the fat metabolism of dietary fat. Your body is going to burn through the dietary fat before it actually really gets to stored body fat to any significant degree. So if you wanted to ramp up fat burn as far as your body fat rather than dietary fat, well, then it would make more sense to fast. And generally speaking, men can engage in these more long-term fasts, let's say like doing alternate day fasting, where you fast 24 to 36 hours at a time, and you do that 2 to 3 days a week or something like that. So you can have a high carb diet on your eating days, and then you can do like this alternate day fasting thing 2 to 3 days a week, and that will really ramp up fat loss to the point where you can drop about 2 to 3 pounds a week of body fat, right? Implementing a strategy like that, right? If you do it twice a week, you'll lose like 1.5 to 2 pounds of fat per week. You do it 3 times a week, you can drop like 2.5, 3 pounds of fat per week, depending on your lifestyle, how active you are, that kind of thing. And then, of course, when you do your exercise. So during the fasting day, now fasting will drive up cortisol, but in an acute fashion, not chronically, right? So fasting will ramp up your cortisol levels, but it's in a very short time frame. The only time the cortisol levels are really serves to be a really big problem is when it's just over a very prolonged period of time. Right? And that's the difference between acute and chronic, right? Acute is you get a spike and it comes back down pretty quick. You just have to be well fed on your eating days, where typically on your eating days, you want to eat at around 120 to 125% of maintenance calories, right? So whatever your maintenance is, whatever your maintenance calories is, you would eat 20 to 25% over that. All right. There's a little bit of math there, but this is why, like, you know, I give people a break. I'm like, I'll just produce the diet plan for you, and you should just go straight from that, right? So that's just one of the things I do in particular. So improving blood flow, reducing stress, and losing weight. These are like the top 3 things to be able to drive down the things that are impeding your testosterone, and then your body will basically just raise your testosterone levels on its own. Your body wants to achieve optimal testosterone levels, right? But there's like roadblocks that are keeping that process from happening. So you remove those roadblocks, like the ones I just mentioned, and your testosterone will just freely just come up, right? One more thing I'll say about carbs is when it comes to carbohydrates, when you eat carbs, this causes your pancreas to release insulin, and insulin is a beautiful hormone that sends all types of important signals to the rest of your body, right? So insulin spikes cause your body to respond with heightened levels of protein synthesis. It also signals your testicles, your testes, to produce and release more testosterone, right? Insulin is needed to ramp up growth hormone, right? And so all of these things happen. Insulin also increases more glucose absorption into your brain and, lean tissue, things like that, heightens serotonin production, which is really important and beneficial for your brain chemistry. So all of these things happen together to the point where you just reach a higher level of health overall. So you'll see, and a lot of bodybuilders, like competitive bodybuilders, know this, which is why when a bodybuilder is trying to maximize muscle size and strength gains, they'll have a high carbohydrate diet, right? Where you'll have bodybuilders who eat like at least 60% carbs. It's typically where it's around. It's like 60%, maybe a little bit above 60%, but at that 60% number, right? The only difference is they'll add in like the 60% carbs and then a ton of protein on top of that, right? Which will create like a pretty significant caloric surplus, right? I'm using the word caloric surplus very loosely because I don't really particularly believe in caloric surpluses. But this will add like a resource surplus, a food surplus, let's just say that. And that ramps up muscle growth, sleep quality, training performance, all of this type of stuff, even creatine production, right? And then, of course, when it gets closer to competition, they want to get as lean and striated and thin-skinned as possible. They'll cut their carbohydrates and then add in caffeine and diuretics and things like that to get all dehydrated before you step on stage, right? I don't condone any of that type of stuff, right? Self-induced dehydration of any kind is a major red flag for me. It's not worth it. Stay hydrated, stay carved up. That's how you stay healthy.